and beast consciousness blurred. Night grew dark. The Norns came forth who should the princes, life determine. They bade him be famed as the bravest of fighters, and of leaders all, the lordliest seemed. The Vikings lived in a world where the harsh realities of existence, famine, disease, violence, required explanation. The Norns provided this framework. They were not distant figures but present forces, their influence felt in every triumph and tragedy. When a child was born, the Norns were believed to visit and determine its future. When a warrior fell in battle, it was because the Norns had cut his thread. The Well of Urðr itself represents the collective memory and wisdom of the cosmos. All that has happened flows into it. All that will be draws from it. This cyclic nature of fate, where past influences future, which becomes past, created a complex temporal understanding among the Norse people. They did not see time as strictly linear, but as an intricate weave where patterns repeat and echo. As you stand now by this conceptual well, watching the three sisters at their eternal task, consider what it meant to live in a world where your fate was already woven. Yet your courage in facing that fate remained entirely your own. For in this paradox lies the heart of Viking psychology and the enduring fascination of the Norns. What does it mean to live when your death is already decided? How do you make choices when the pattern is already set? These questions weren't philosophical abstractions for the Vikings. They were the warp and weft of daily existence. Picture yourself in a longhouse on the Norwegian coast. Winter howls outside, but within, firelight dances across wooden pillars carved with images of gods and heroes. A mother has just given birth. As the newborn's first cries pierce the smoky air, an elder woman whispers, "The Norns visit tonight." For Vikings believed that 3 days after birth, the Norns would come to assign the child's Urlug, the shape and boundaries of its life. This belief is preserved in the saga of Nornagests, where the Norns visit a newborn boy. Two Norns bestow good fortune, but Skuld, angered by disrespect, declares the child will live only as long as a nearby candle burns. The quick-thinking mother extinguishes the candle, preserving it unburnt, thus extending her son's life until he himself chooses to light it many years later. Such tales reveal how the Vikings understood fate, not as a rigid script, but as a framework with boundaries. Within those boundaries, human choice and action remained vital. This concept of wyrd, Old Norse Urdr, was more complex than simple predestination. It was a web of cause and effect, stretching backward through ancestors and forward through descendants. Archaeological evidence supports the cultural significance of the Norns. Spindle whorls, tools used in spinning thread, have been found in women's graves throughout Scandinavia, often decorated with symbols associated with fate and prophecy. These weren't merely practical tools, but carried spiritual significance, connecting mortal women's weaving with the cosmic weaving of the Norns. The concept of fate permeated Viking martial culture as well. The famous Bjarkamal, partially preserved in Saxo Grammaticus's work, contains this telling verse spoken by a warrior facing certain death. Fate rules all men must die, thus the Norns have woven it. No man can withstand the word of Urd, though his heart be stout and strong. This fatalistic outlook didn't breed passivity, but rather a fierce determination. If death was predetermined, then fear became pointless. What mattered was how one faced the inevitable, with courage or cowardice. This philosophy gave birth to the concept of laughing death in the face, exemplified in numerous saga accounts of warriors smiling as they received mortal wounds. Consider the account from Njal's saga, where the warrior Skarphedin faces imminent death with a smile, taunting his killers even as they prepare to burn him alive. When asked why he smiles, he replies that he foresees the deaths of his enemies, implying that though his thread is being cut, the Norns have worse in store for those who kill him. The practical implications of this worldview were profound. Viking society valued honour and reputation precisely because these were elements one could control within the boundaries of fate. You might not be able to escape the death the Norns had assigned you, but you could determine whether skalds would sing of your courage for generations. This attitude extended beyond the battlefield. When Vikings set out on dangerous voyages across uncharted seas, they did so with the understanding that the Norns had already determined whether they would return. This didn't make them reckless. They still prepared meticulously, building superior ships and developing advanced navigation techniques, but it allowed them to face the terrifying uncertainty of the open ocean. Women in Viking society had a special relationship with the Norns. As weavers themselves, women were seen as mortal echoes of these cosmic spinners. The Völuspá introduces a chilling image of Valkyries, female figures who choose the slain in battle, weaving on a loom made of human entrails, with heads for weights and arrows for shuttles. This grisly metaphor connects human warfare with the Norns' weaving, suggesting that mortal conflicts are merely threads in a larger pattern. The archaeological record provides evidence of this connection between weaving and fate. Loom weights found at Viking sites sometimes bear runic inscriptions invoking protection or good fortune. A particularly notable example from Birka, Sweden, bears the inscription, "May the Norns favour this weaving," suggesting a direct appeal to these goddesses for blessing ordinary work. Even childbirth, that most natural and common of human experiences, was viewed through the lens of fate. The Norse word for midwife, nornagests, literally means guest of the Norns, highlighting how these practitioners were seen as working alongside the fate goddesses at critical moments of transition. The concept of fate influenced Viking legal practices as well. When disputes were settled at the Thing assembly, participants sometimes invoked the Norns as witnesses to oaths and agreements. The implication was clear. One might deceive mortal judges, but one could not hide from the all-seeing Norns, who would weave appropriate consequences for oath breakers. Perhaps most fascinating is how this fatalistic worldview coexisted with the Vikings' remarkable innovation and adaptability. These were people who developed sophisticated technologies, established trade networks spanning continents, and colonized lands from Russia to North America. Their belief in fate didn't make them passive recipients of destiny, but active participants working within its framework. Consider the Viking practice of casting runes for divination. These weren't attempts to change fate, but to glimpse what the Norns had woven, to better prepare oneself for what was coming. A warrior might cast runes before battle, not hoping to avoid his destined death, but to understand how best to meet it. In the saga of Eric the Red, when Thorbjorg, the seeress, performs divination for a struggling settlement in Greenland, she isn't changing their fate, but revealing what the Norns have already determined, that better times await if they can endure the present hardship. This knowledge doesn't alter their destiny, but gives them strength to face it. The psychological impact of this worldview is profound. Modern psychologists might recognise elements of what we now call radical acceptance, the practice of fully accepting circumstances beyond one's control while taking action where possible. Vikings accepted the boundaries of fate while fiercely exercising agency within those boundaries. As the skald Egil Skallagrimsson, who lost several sons to illness and drowning, wrote in his heart-wrenching poem Sona Torek, The Loss of My Sons, "I know it well. In my son was the makings of a worthy man. Had he reached the age when words bear fruit, and the gods had granted him growth, he ever held out to his father's word, though all the world opposed it, and bore me up, when battles were near, stood by my side, against my foes. Oft does my mind dwell on the loss of my son, cut down in his youth. Grimly I think, what sort of man he would have been had he lived." Here Egil acknowledges both his grief and the immutability of fate. The Norns cut his son's thread early, and no father's love could prevent it. Yet within this acceptance, Egil finds the strength to continue living and even to create art from his pain. This perhaps is the most enduring legacy of the Norns in Viking life, teaching that while the boundaries of existence may be fixed, the quality of one's journey within those boundaries remains a matter of choice. The thread may be measured, but how brightly it shines depends on the one who lives it. The mist thickens around Yggdrasil as we delve deeper into the stories where the Norns appear, not as abstract concepts, but as active participants in the great drama of Norse mythology. These narratives reveal the complex relationship between gods, heroes, and the implacable forces of fate. Our first tale comes from the haunting verses of Völuspá, the prophecy of the seeress, the first and most famous poem of the Poetic Edda. Here, a Völva, seeress, recounts the creation and eventual destruction of the world to Odin himself. Ask, I remember, and Embla too, from whom mankind has come, the first breath of life. From Odin they got, soul from Lodr, and sense from Honir. But immediately after describing how the gods breathed life into the first humans, the Völva introduces the Norns. Thence come the maidens, mighty in wisdom, 3 from the dwelling, down beneath the tree. Earth is one named, Verðandi the next, and Skuld the third. The fate of men they established. The lives they allotted to the sons of men, their destinies set. The juxtaposition is striking. In the very moment humans receive the divine gifts of life, soul, and consciousness from the gods, the Norns appear to set the boundaries of those gifts. The gods may give life, but the Norns determine its course. Imagine this scene, the newly created humans still marvelling at their existence, becoming aware of 3 towering female figures emerging from beneath Yggdrasil. The first, Urd, ancient as the mountains, her face lined with the memory of all that has been. The second, Verðandi, vibrant and present, her gaze fixed upon the unfolding moment. The third, Skuld, partially veiled, her eyes seeing what has not yet come to pass. As they approach, golden threads materialise between their fingers, and the first humans feel the invisible boundaries of their existence taking shape. This establishes a fundamental tension in Norse mythology. The gods themselves, for all their power, must operate within the patterns woven by the Norns. Even Odin, who sacrificed his eye for wisdom and hung 9 days on Yggdrasil to obtain the knowledge of runes, cannot alter what the Norns have decreed. The Prose Edda elaborates on this relationship, describing how the gods hold their daily assembly at the Well of Urðr, where the Norns dwell. This proximity suggests both respect and wariness. The gods must keep the weavers of fate close, must consult them, even as they chafe under their decrees. One of the most poignant illustrations of the Norns' power comes in the tale of Helgi Hundingsbane, found in the Poetic Edda. Helgi is a heroic figure whose fate is explicitly connected to the Norns from birth. 'Twas night in the dwelling, and Norns there came, who shaped the life of the lofty one. They bade him most famed, of fighters all, and best of princes, ever to be. The scene unfolds in dramatic fashion. A child born at night, the household hushed in anticipation. Then, sensed rather than seen, 3 female figures enter the chamber. They approach the cradle, bending over the newborn. The first, Urd, touches his brow and speaks of his ancestry, connecting him to the past. Verðandi places her hand over his heart, declaring the strength he possesses in this moment. Finally, Skuld, with eyes that see beyond the present, announces his future glory and eventual doom. Helgi indeed becomes a mighty warrior, but his story ends in tragedy, despite, or because of, the Norns' blessing. He is killed through treachery, demonstrating that even being most famed of fighters doesn't grant immunity from fate's decrees. Perhaps most revealing is the story of Nornagests, guest of the Norns, preserved in a saga of the same name. Nornagest arrives at King Olaf Tryggvason's court and tells his extraordinary tale. When he was born, 3 Norns came to assign his fate. The first 2 bestowed positive fortunes, but the third, offended by some slight, declared that the child would live only until the candle burning nearby was consumed. Immediately, the first 2 Norns extinguished the candle and gave it to the child's mother with instructions never to relight it. Nornagest has carried this candle for 300 years, effectively cheating death by preserving the unburnt candle. At King Olaf's Christian court, however, Nornages decides his time has come. He accepts baptism and then deliberately lights the candle, dying peacefully as it burns down. Visualize this scene at Olaf's court. An impossibly old man producing a small, ancient candle from a silver box. The courtiers falling silent as he recounts his encounter with the Norns. The king himself, champion of the new Christian faith, watching in awe as this living connection to the pagan past makes his choice. The flame catches, and all present understand they are witnessing the fulfillment of a decree made 3 centuries earlier. This tale beautifully illustrates the complex interplay between fate and choice in Norse thought. The Norns set boundaries, the candle, but within those boundaries human choice remains significant, when to light it. It also shows how even the Norns' decrees could sometimes be negotiated or temporarily circumvented, though never truly escaped. The Norns figure prominently in the prophecies of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. In Völuspá, as the seeress describes the coming doom, she speaks of the Norns' role. The Norns shall arise from earth's deep well. The ancient maids from the east shall come. They shall judge the strife of god and giant, and tokens of war shall truly know. The image is stark and terrible. The 3 sisters rising from their well as the world burns around them, not preventing the destruction, but bearing witness to it, perhaps even facilitating it as part of the necessary cycle of existence. They stand impassive as Fenrir devours Odin, as Thor falls to the Midgard serpent, as fire and flood consume the 9 realms. Yet even in this apocalypse, the Norns' weaving continues. For Ragnarok is not the end, but a transition. After the destruction, the Völuspá tells us, a new world will rise from the sea, and the surviving gods will gather on Yggdrasil plain. The cycle continues, and new patterns form in the Norns' weaving. Another fascinating appearance of the Norns comes in the saga of the Volsungs, where the Valkyrie Brynhild explains to the hero Sigurd, "Some are of the family of the Aesir, some are of the family of the elves, some are daughters of Dvalin. Those who are of good family are appointed to protect the lives of those who shall be great warriors. These are called Valkyries. These maidens serve in Valhalla and bear drink and look after the tableware and drinking vessels. Norns who are of good family are appointed for those who meet with good fortune. Some are of the family of the dwarves, some are of the family of the dark elves." This passage reveals a hierarchy of fate weavers in Norse cosmology. The 3 great Norns, Urd, Verðandi and Skuld, oversee the grand pattern, but lesser Norns of various origins handle individual destinies. This suggests a bureaucracy of fate, with different levels of authority and jurisdiction. Some Norns determining the fate of gods and realms, others concerned with individual human lives. Imagine a cosmic weaving hall beneath Yggdrasil, where Norns of various origins work on different sections of an immense tapestry. The 3 great sisters oversee the central pattern, while lesser Norns attend to the countless individual threads that make up the whole. Some threads shine gold, heroes, others silver, kings, still others the humble browns and greys of ordinary lives, yet all are necessary to the pattern. The Grimnismal, another poem from the Poetic Edda, mentions the Norns in connection with Yggdrasil. "More serpents lie under Yggdrasil's ash than any fool can imagine. Goin and Moin, Grafitnir's sons, Grabak and Grafoluth, Ofnir and Svafnir, shall ever, I think, gnaw at the twigs of the tree. The ash Yggdrasil endures hardship more than men know of. The heart bites above, and rot sets in at the side, while Nithhog gnaws from below." Earth is the name of the first of the wells, where the judgment seat of the gods is. Each day thither, the gods ride up over Bifrost Bridge, the bright. This passage places the Norns' well in a cosmic context, one of 3 wells that nourish and threaten Yggdrasil. The world tree suffers constant assault from various creatures, yet endures thanks in part to the Norns' daily ministrations. They water it with white mud from their well, preserving it against decay and the gnawing of Nithhogg, the dragon, at its roots. Visualise this daily ritual, the three sisters drawing sacred water from their well, mixing it with the white clay that surrounds it. With reverent care, they apply this mixture to Yggdrasil's trunk and roots, healing the damage done by countless creatures. This act is both practical maintenance and sacred ceremony, for in preserving the world tree, they preserve the cosmos itself. The Fafnismal, which records Sigurd's conversation with the dying dragon Fafnir, contains this exchange. Sigurd said, "Tell me, Fafnir, if you are so exceeding wise, who are the Norns who help in need and free mothers from children?" Fafnir said, "Of many kinds, I think, are the Norns. Some are of the Aesir, some of the elves, and some are daughters of Dvalin." This cryptic exchange suggests that certain Norns specifically oversee childbirth, freeing mothers from children. This connects the cosmic weaving of fate with the very physical process of bringing new life into the world. It also reinforces the idea that different categories of Norns have different responsibilities within the cosmic order. One of the most vivid depictions of the Norns' weaving comes not from the Eddas, but from Njal's saga, where a man named Dorud witnesses 12 Valkyries weaving on a loom made of human entrails before the Battle of Clontarf. Blood rains from the cloudy web on the broad loom of slaughter. The web of man, grey as armour, is now being woven. The Valkyries will cross it with a crimson weft. The warp is made of human entrails. Human heads are used as weights. The heddle rods are blood-wet spears. The shafts are iron-bound, and arrows are the shuttles. With swords we will weave this web of battle. While these weavers are identified as Valkyries rather than Norns, the imagery connects directly to the Norns' role as weavers of fate. The battle's outcome, who lives, who dies, which side prevails, is being woven before it occurs. The gruesome materials of the loom emphasise the violent reality being created. Picture this macabre scene. 12 tall, pale women in a stone chamber, working at a loom constructed from the bodies of fallen warriors. Their movements are rhythmic, almost hypnotic, as they pass shuttles made of arrows through warps of intestines. With each pass, the pattern of the coming battle becomes clearer. Who will fall, who will triumph, how the field will look when drenched in blood. These stories collectively reveal the Norns as figures of awe and fear in Norse mythology, beings whose power transcends even that of the gods. They are not capricious like many deities, but represent an implacable cosmic law. Their weaving isn't arbitrary, but follows patterns established by cause and effect across time. Perhaps most significantly, these tales show that while fate in Norse mythology is predetermined, it isn't simple predestination. It's a complex interweaving of past actions, present circumstances, and future necessities. The Norns don't just dictate what will happen, they weave what must happen based on what has already occurred. This nuanced view of fate provided the Vikings with a cosmology that explained the harsh realities of their world, while still allowing for human agency and responsibility. The thread may be measured, but how it intertwines with others, that remains partly in mortal hands. The mists part to reveal deeper questions. What did the Norns truly represent to the Norse people? Why did these three weavers of fate hold such prominence in a culture celebrated for its warrior ethos? To answer these questions, we must look beyond the myths themselves to their psychological, historical, and comparative contexts. Consider first the etymological roots of the Norns' names. Urd, Urdia, derives from the Old Norse verb verða, to become or happen. It represents not just the past, but the principle that what has happened shapes what can happen. Verðandi, from the same verb root, embodies the present continuous, that which is in the process of becoming. Skuld, contrary to simple association with future, connects to skuld, debt or obligation. This suggests not just what will be, but what must be as a consequence of past and present. This linguistic analysis simply represent three time states, but embody a concept of causality that spans time. how past actions create present circumstances which necessitate future outcomes. This is not fatalism, but a recognition of consequence, a worldview that acknowledges how actions ripple across time. Archaeologist Neil Price, in his groundbreaking work on Viking belief systems, suggests that the Norns represent the Viking understanding of natural law, the observable patterns of cause and effect that govern existence. In a world where survival depended on recognising these patterns, when to plant, when to sail, when ice would form or thaw, personifying these laws as weavers made conceptual sense. Imagine yourself as a Viking farmer, watching the seasons cycle predictably, year after year. The pattern seems predetermined, woven by unseen hands. The winter that kills the weak, the spring that rewards preparation, the summer that demands labour, the autumn that gives harvest in proportion to effort. All could be understood as the working of fate weavers who reward and punish according to immutable rules. Comparative mythology offers another window into the Norns' significance. They bear striking similarities to fate goddesses in other Indo-European traditions. The Greek Moirai, Clotho, Lachesis and Atropos, the Roman Parcae, Nona, Decima and Morta, and the Slavic Sudis. All are typically depicted as three women who spin, measure, and cut the threads of life. The Greek Moirai particularly mirror the Norns' functions. Clotho, spinner, spins the thread of life, similar to how Urd establishes what has become. Lachesis, allotter, measures the thread, determining its length, paralleling Verdand's role in the unfolding present. Atropos, unturnable, cuts the thread, ending life, much as Skuld determines what must be. This cross-cultural pattern suggests a deep psychological truth recognised across ancient societies, that human life follows patterns beyond individual control, that existence has boundaries, and that recognising these limitations is essential to wisdom. As classicist Bernard Knox noted about Greek tragedy, the recognition of necessity is the beginning of freedom. The Romans adapted the Greek concept, with their parcae, from parere, to bring forth, emphasising birth and death as the boundaries of fate. Nona, 9th month of pregnancy, presided over birth, Decima over life's course, and Morta, death, over its end. Like the Norns, they were present at birth to decree a child's destiny. What's fascinating is how these parallel traditions developed similar imagery despite geographical separation. The thread as metaphor for life appears across cultures, suggesting either cultural diffusion or independent recognition of a powerful conceptual tool. The act of spinning, turning chaos, loose fibre, into order, thread, provides a perfect metaphor for how random events become meaningful patterns in human experience. Psychologically, the Norns represent what Carl Jung might call an archetypal expression of humanity's relationship with time and contingency. They embody our understanding that life has a beginning, middle, and end, and that these phases connect causally. Jung himself noted the prevalence of triple goddesses across cultures as expressions of the complete cycle of existence. The Norns also reflect what psychologists call locus of control, the extent to which people believe they determine their own outcomes versus being controlled by external forces. Viking culture maintained a fascinating balance, acknowledging external determination, fate, while emphasising internal response, courage. This paradoxical position creates psychological resilience by focusing attention on what can be controlled, one's attitude, rather than what cannot, ultimate outcomes. Consider how this worldview would function in the extreme conditions Vikings faced. On a dangerous sea voyage, believing the Norns had already determined whether you would drown might actually reduce anxiety and improve performance. If drowning was your fate, fear became pointless. If survival was decreed, confidence was justified. Either way, focusing on skillful sailing rather than possible outcomes became easier. Anthropologist Mary Douglas's concept of grid and group provides another interpretive lens. Viking society featured high group, strong collective identity, and variable grid, the degree to which life is constrained by external rules. The Norns represent the grid element, the understanding that certain constraints are non-negotiable. This allowed Vikings to focus their considerable energy on areas where agency was possible, rather than fighting immutable natural laws. Historian of religion Mircea Eliade might interpret the Norns as representatives of sacred time, the cyclical, mythic time that gives meaning to profane, linear time. By connecting individual lives to cosmic patterns through the metaphor of weaving, the Norns transformed random biological events into meaningful participation in sacred order. The Well of Urðr itself deserves deeper analysis. As a source of wisdom and memory, it represents what philosopher Paul Ricoeur called the sedimentation of time, how past events accumulate and form the foundation for present understanding. When the Norns water Yggdrasil with liquid from this well, they symbolically nourish the present with the accumulated wisdom of the past. Imagine standing at this conceptual well, a pool that contains not water, but the distilled essence of all that has occurred. Every action, every decision, every triumph and tragedy has left its trace here. The Norns draw from this collective memory to shape what comes next, ensuring that the future grows organically from what has been. Feminist interpretations offer another perspective on the Norns. In a pantheon dominated by male warrior gods, these three female figures wield power that even Odin cannot challenge. They represent a feminine principle of creation and destruction that complements and constrains masculine force. Their art, weaving, was traditionally women's work in Norse society. Yet in the cosmic sphere, this women's work shapes the destiny of warriors and kings. Archaeological evidence supports this connection between weaving and women's power. Textile production tools are among the most common grave goods in female Viking burials, suggesting that weaving was central to female identity. The symbolic elevation of this craft to cosmic significance in the Norns myth may reflect women's actual social power in Viking society, less visible than male martial prowess, but no less essential to community survival. Literary scholar Caroline Larrington notes that the Norns represent a different kind of power than that wielded by the Aesir gods. While Odin and Thor exert force directly, the Norns work through pattern and process. They don't fight battles, but create the conditions that make battles necessary or unnecessary. This represents a sophisticated understanding of how systemic forces often shape events more profoundly than individual actions. The Norns' relationship with Yggdrasil itself is significant. The world tree represents the cosmos, living, growing, but vulnerable to decay. The Norns' daily care prevents this decay, suggesting that fate isn't just about individual destinies, but about maintaining cosmic order itself. Without the pattern-preserving work of the Norns, chaos would overtake creation. This maintenance role connects to what environmental philosophers call care ethics, the understanding that sustaining existing systems often requires more wisdom than creating new ones. In a culture that celebrated conquest and innovation, the Norns represent the equally important value of preservation and continuity. The complex relationship between the Norns and the gods deserves exploration. In most myths, the gods must accept the Norns' decrees, yet they constantly seek knowledge of fate through various means. Odin's sacrifice for wisdom, his conversations with Völvers, his ravens that bring information. This suggests a worldview where foreknowledge, while not enabling escape from fate, allows better navigation within its constraints. Historian of religion Georges Dumézil, known for his tripartite analysis of Indo-European religions, might place the Norns within his third function, that of fertility, sustenance and wealth. Their nurturing of Yggdrasil and their connection to birth place them in this category, complementing the first function, sovereignty magic, represented by Odin, and the second function, warfare, represented by Thor. The Norns' weaving metaphor itself contains philosophical depth. A woven fabric has both warp, vertical threads, and weft, horizontal threads. The warp might represent the fixed elements of fate, birth, death, natural law, while the weft represents the choices made within these constraints. The resulting pattern emerges from the interaction of necessity and choice, just as human lives unfold at the intersection of determination and free will. Consider how this metaphor would appear visually. Vertical threads stretched tight on the loom, representing the boundaries of possibility, while horizontal threads weave between them, creating patterns of actual lived experience. Some weft threads might be bright, others dark, some thick, others thin, representing the quality and character of choices made within fate's framework. The concept of wyrd, Old English, or Urðr, Old Norse, that the Norns embody differs significantly from later Christian concepts of predestination. Wyrd is not decreed by a personal deity with moral intentions, but emerges from the impersonal operations of cause and effect across time. Actions have consequences, not because a god judges them, but because the universe operates according to patterns the Norns maintain. This view creates what philosopher Peter Adamson calls soft determinism, a middle path between absolute predestination and complete free will. The course of events is determined, but determined partly by one's own previous actions, feeding back into the pattern. The Norns weave with threads spun from one's own deeds. The Norns' triple nature connects to widespread Indo-European tripartite symbolism. Georges Dumézil noted that Indo-European cultures frequently organised cosmic and social concepts in threes. The Norns represent a temporal trinity that parallels other significant triads: the three wells beneath Yggdrasil, the three roots of the world tree, the division of the cosmos into underworld, Middle-earth, and heavens. This tripartite structure creates cognitive completeness, a beginning, middle, and end that satisfies human psychological need for narrative closure. By personifying these three phases as sisters, Norse mythology humanizes time itself, making its passage comprehensible through familiar family relationships. The Norns' role in Ragnarok reveals another layer of meaning. Even cosmic destruction occurs within fate's pattern. It is necessary, not random. This cyclical view of existence, where even gods die to make way for renewal, reflects agricultural society's understanding of necessary sacrifice for regeneration. The Norns ensure that even apocalypse serves pattern rather than negating it. Ultimately, the Norns represent what philosopher Martha Nussbaum calls the fragility of goodness, the understanding that human flourishing remains vulnerable to forces beyond control. Viking culture didn't deny this vulnerability, but incorporated it into a worldview that valued courage precisely because outcomes remained uncertain. The Norns teach that wisdom lies not in escaping fate, but in recognising its patterns and responding with dignity. They embody the mature recognition that freedom exists not in the absence of constraints, but in meaningful navigation within them. As Snorri writes in Gylfaginning, "Good and evil wyrd comes to every man, yet he cannot meet it if it is not destined for him." In this ancient wisdom, modern minds might find surprising relevance. In an age of algorithms that predict our behaviour, environmental systems approaching tipping points, and genetic codes that influence our development, we too live with modern Norns that weave patterns we must acknowledge. Like the Vikings, our freedom may lie not in denying these patterns, but in facing them with courage and clarity. As dawn breaks over Yggdrasil in our mind's eye, casting long shadows from its ancient branches, we turn to consider how the Norns' threads extend into our modern world. Their influence stretches far beyond the Viking Age, weaving through literature, psychology, popular culture, and our contemporary understanding of fate and free will. When J.R.R. Tolkien created Middle-earth, he drew deeply from Norse mythology, including the concept of fate embodied by the Norns. In The Silmarillion, he writes of the Vala Vyra the Weaver, who weaves all things that have ever been in time into her storied webs, and the halls of Mandos that ever widen as the ages pass are clothed with them. This direct parallel to the Norns shows how ancient concepts of fate weaving continue to resonate in modern fantasy literature. Imagine walking through Vairi's halls, in Mandos, tapestries stretching endlessly in all directions, each depicting events from Middle-earth's history with perfect fidelity. Like the Norns weaving, these tapestries don't just record history, but somehow contain it, making the past eternally present through art. The Norns' influence appears in Richard Wagner's operatic cycle, Der Ring des Nibelungen, where the three Norns appear on stage, spinning the rope of destiny and singing of past, present and future. When their rope breaks, it symbolises the coming end of the gods, a direct parallel to Ragnarok. Wagner's work subsequently influenced countless artistic representations of Norse mythology, cementing the Norns in Western cultural consciousness. In modern fantasy literature, the concept of fate-weaving goddesses appears repeatedly. Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series features the pattern, woven by the Wheel of Time itself, with certain individuals appearing as Tavarin, people around whom the pattern centres, similar to heroes whose fates the Norns might give special attention. Neil Gaiman's American Gods includes the Norns as characters, adapting their ancient role for a contemporary American setting. Marvel's Thor comics and subsequent films incorporate elements of the Norse mythology, though often simplified or altered. The character of Karnilla, Queen of the Norns, while not directly based on Urd, Verðandi and Skuld, draws from their association with fate and prophecy. The Marvel Cinematic Universe references the Well of Urðr as a cosmic location where Vision discusses the nature of power with Thor. The concept of three women determining fate appears in Disney's Sleeping Beauty with the three good fairies, and in Brave with the witch who creates fate-altering spells. While not direct adaptations, these characters share the Norns' function of influencing destiny, showing how ancient mythological concepts transform into new narratives while retaining their essential functions. Video games have embraced Norse mythology enthusiastically, with titles like God of War, 2018, featuring the Norns as part of its mythological framework. The game, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, incorporates Norse concepts of fate and destiny into its narrative about mental illness, creating a psychological interpretation of mythological patterns. Beyond entertainment, the Norns' legacy lives in how we conceptualise fate and free will in the modern world. Philosopher Alain de Botton notes that ancient fatalistic philosophies often produced greater courage and serenity than modern emphases on unlimited choice and control. The Viking acknowledgement of boundaries, personified in the Norns, may offer wisdom to contemporary individuals overwhelmed by seemingly unlimited but ultimately constrained choices. Psychologically, the Norns represent what psychotherapist Irvin Yalom calls existential givens, the non-negotiable conditions of existence that all humans must face: mortality, freedom within constraints, essential isolation, and the search for meaning. By personifying these conditions as weavers, Norse culture created a framework for accepting life's inherent limitations while maintaining agency within them. Picture a modern psychotherapy session where a client grapples with circumstances beyond their control: illness, loss, systemic constraints. A therapist might invoke, without naming them, the wisdom of the Norns, acknowledging what cannot be changed while focusing energy on response rather than resistance. The ancient concept provides a framework for modern resilience. The Norns' association with weaving connects to contemporary fibre arts movements that reclaim traditionally feminine crafts as sources of power and expression. Modern weavers, knitters, and textile artists often explicitly reference the Norns and other mythological weavers, recognizing the profound metaphorical connection between creating textile patterns and creating meaning from experience. Environmental philosophers have found resonance in the Norns' daily care of Yggdrasil, seeing it as a model for sustainable relationship with natural systems. The image of fate goddesses maintaining cosmic balance rather than exploiting it offers a counterpoint to extractive approaches to nature. The Norns don't just take from the world tree, they actively preserve it, recognizing their dependence on its continued health. The Well of Urðr, with its connotations of accumulated wisdom and memory, parallels contemporary discussions about collective knowledge in digital spaces. Some technologists explicitly reference Norse mythology when discussing how information accumulates and influences future developments. The well of data, from which artificial intelligence draws, for instance, functions similarly to how the Norns draw from their well-to-water Yggdrasil. Even in science, echoes of the Norns appear. When physicists discuss how past conditions constrain future possibilities, explore how evolutionary history limits future adaptations, they express in scientific terms what the Vikings personified through the Norns, the understanding that what has become shapes what can become. The quantum physics concept of path dependency, how a particle's history influences its future possibilities, bears striking similarity to the Norse concept of wyrd. Both recognise that while multiple futures may be possible, they are constrained by accumulated past events. The scientific principle and the mythological concept both grapple with how time creates patterns that shape what follows. Contemporary Norse paganism, Asatru, has revived worship of the old gods, including recognition of the Norns. Modern practitioners often perform blot, sacrificial rituals, to the Norns at significant life transitions, acknowledging their role in shaping destiny. These contemporary religious expressions demonstrate the continuing spiritual relevance of these ancient figures. The philosophical concept of determinism versus free will, a debate that has raged from ancient Greece through Enlightenment philosophy to modern neuroscience, finds nuanced expression in the Norse mythology. The Viking position was neither absolute determinism nor unlimited freedom, but a sophisticated middle ground, recognizing both pattern and choice, a position increasingly supported by contemporary understanding of how genes, environment and choice interact to shape human lives. Feminist scholars have reclaimed the Norns as examples of female power in ancient religions. Their ability to shape even the gods' destinies represents what theologian Carol P. Christ calls female divine power, not power over others, but power to shape, connect, and sustain. In a world still grappling with gender equality, these ancient goddesses provide models of feminine strength that doesn't mimic masculine dominance, but offers an alternative form of influence. The Norns' legacy extends even to how we conceptualize time itself. Philosopher Henri Bergson distinguished between clock time, uniform, measurable, and duration, subjectively experienced time. The Norns represent a third concept, meaningful time, or story time, where events connect causally rather than chronologically. This perspective offers an alternative to both linear Western time concepts and cyclical Eastern ones. As you sit reading these words, the Norns' influence touches you in ways you might not recognise. When you speak of something being meant to be, or its time having come, you echo their ancient wisdom. When you recognise how past choices have shaped your current options, you acknowledge what the Vikings called wyrd. When you accept certain limitations while exercising courage within them, you embody the psychological stance the Norse mythology fostered. The threads that the Norns began weaving in the pre-Christian North continue to unspool into our present, connecting us to ancestors who, like us, sought to understand their place in a universe that seemed both patterned and unpredictable. Their metaphor of weaving, where constraint and creativity combine to produce beauty, offers wisdom for navigating our own complex relationship with destiny. Perhaps this is why the Norns endure while many other mythological figures fade, because they represent not supernatural intervention, but the natural patterns that all humans, regardless of culture or era, must recognise and navigate. They embody the wisdom that true freedom comes not from escaping life's loom, but from becoming a conscious participant in its weaving. The mist thickens once more around Yggdrasil as our journey through the realm of the Norns draws to a close. Yet like the Vikings of old, who understood that endings are merely transformations in the greater pattern, we too stand at a threshold rather than an end point. The three sisters, Urd with her ancient wisdom, Verðandi with her present awareness, and Skuld with her inevitable necessity, continue their weaving whether we acknowledge them or not. The question remains, how does their ancient wisdom speak to your life today? Consider for a moment the threads of your own existence. Some were selected for you before birth, your parentage, your place, your time. Others emerge from choices made, paths taken or avoided, moments seized or surrendered. If you were to visualize your life as a tapestry in progress, what patterns would emerge? What colors would dominate? Where would the weave be tight and ordered? And where would it show the beautiful irregularities that come from unexpected turns? The Vikings found extraordinary courage in their understanding of fate, not because it promised them victory, but precisely because it didn't. They recognized that the measure of a life lies not in controlling outcomes, but in how one faces what comes. There is profound psychological wisdom in this perspective, a wisdom our achievement-obsessed modern world often forgets. When you face circumstances beyond your control, and we all do you rage against the Norns' decree, or do you, like the Vikings, find freedom within the boundaries they've set? Do you waste energy fighting what cannot be changed, or do you focus your strength on what remains within your power, your response, your attitude, your inner steadfastness? The Norse warrior who laughed in the face of death wasn't denying reality, but transcending fear of it. Similarly, acknowledging the constraints in your life, biological, economic, temporal, doesn't mean surrendering to them, but understanding clearly where your actual choices lie. This clarity itself is a form of power. Perhaps you felt the Norns' presence in your own life without naming them as such. That moment when seemingly random events suddenly reveal a pattern. The chance encounter that changed everything. The disaster that, in retrospect, led to necessary growth. The unexpected door that opened when another closed. These moments when we sense the weaving of larger patterns are when the Norns whisper to us across the centuries. I invite you now to share your own relationship with fate. Have you experienced moments when seemingly random events revealed an underlying pattern? Do you find the Viking perspective on fate empowering or limiting? How do you balance acceptance of what cannot be changed with the courage to change what can be? The comment section below awaits your reflections, your stories, your questions. For those who wish to delve deeper into these mysteries, the Well of Urðr remains open to you. Primary sources like the Poetic Edda and Prose Edda await your exploration. Scholars like Neil Price, Caroline Larrington, and John Lindo offer insightful analyses of Norse mythology and its psychological implications. Contemporary philosophers continue to wrestle with the same questions of fate and free will that the Vikings addressed through their myths. If you found value in this journey through the realm of the Norns, consider sharing it with others who might appreciate their wisdom. The patterns we recognise gain power when shared, just as the Vikings strengthened their understanding of fate through communal storytelling. And if you haven't yet joined our community of explorers into ancient wisdom, consider subscribing. Each video is a thread in a larger tapestry we're weaving together, a pattern that connects ancient insights to contemporary challenges, mythological frameworks to modern understanding. In our next exploration, we'll travel far from the mist-shrouded roots of Yggdrasil to the sun-drenched temples of Mesoamerica. There we'll encounter the Aztec warriors, men who, like the Vikings, faced death with remarkable courage, born of spiritual understanding. We'll discover how their cosmic vision shaped one of history's most misunderstood civilizations, and how their concept of sacrifice parallels yet differs from Norse fatalism. The Aztecs, like the Norse, believed that cosmic order required human participation, but expressed this belief through dramatically different practices. Their warriors, bound by fate to feed the sun with their blood or the blood of captives, navigated their own complex relationship between destiny and choice. Their story offers another perspective on how humans create meaning in the face of mortality. As the Norns continue their eternal weaving, and as Yggdrasil stands firm despite the forces that assail it, remember that you too participate in patterns larger than yourself. Your choices, like threads in the cosmic loom, connect to countless others, creating designs that may only be visible from perspectives you cannot yet imagine. The Vikings found strength not in denying fate, but in facing it with clear eyes and unwavering hearts. Perhaps their greatest legacy is this paradoxical wisdom. True freedom comes not from escaping life's patterns, but from weaving your thread with conscious intention, whatever constraints the Norns may have set. Until our paths cross again beneath different mythic skies, may you weave wisely, live boldly, and find meaning in both the pattern and your place within it. For as the Vikings understood, it is not the length of the thread that matters most, but how brightly it shines in the great tapestry of existence. The Norns have spoken. The choice of how to listen, that remains yours alone.